Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and it is August 15th, 2014, the Feast of the Ascension, and it's also the famous Feria Augusta, the harvest festival established by the Emperor Augustus at this time of year, because, of course, at this point, the European wheat harvest is in. And we're also passing, as we will discuss later in the show, we're passing through all these anniversaries of the First World War. But as we always, that binocular view of history, it's the one that's recommended by Confucius, it's the one that's recommended by Machiavelli, and that is one eye very much fixed on current events, the other eye fixed on history more or less ancient, according to the specific relevance. So, what are we looking at right now? A very hot situation. The Anglo-American mad dog imperialists are very much on the march. We are told that the adventurer who claims to be the president of Ukraine, the chocolate baron, the chocolate soldier, Poroshenko, or as we prefer to call him, Pornoshenko. We call him Pornoshenko because his policies are obscene. His threat to world peace is obscene. This imperialist stooge, Pornoshenko, is apparently working together with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. That seems to be the imperialist combination operative right now. Obama, unfortunately, too lazy, too feckless to get his hands dirty in this stuff. So he leaves it to Joe and Joe's mediocre, corrupt, nepotist son. Remember, a while ago we had clashes with Beau Biden, the Attorney General of Delaware. His idea of running a campaign was to put critics into the D.C. jail on fake Delaware warrants. This time we're dealing with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and that's the conveyor belt of aggressive imperialist policy to Comrade Pornoshenko there in Kiev. So what we're learning, Pornoshenko is coordinating every step with Cameron, perfide Albion. If we wanted to, as we've been discussing over these past weeks, if we want to assign war guilt to the events of 1914, Sir Edward Grey, Lord Jackie Fisher, Edward VII, his networks, and in particular his son, George V. Last week we had George V telling Sir Edward Grey, as if he needed to be told, Grey, you must find a pretext to embroil Britain and the British Empire in war against Germany. And lots of people listening to this show have had relatives killed as a result of that despicable policy. Well, now we've got Cameron coordinating with Pornoshenko. This is extremely ominous for the peace of the world, and it points to the adventurism. The New York stock market has taken a dive today, minus 200 points, and that's just a blip. But they're concerned. It's very interesting. The sort of the soft networks, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, right, the pure propaganda networks where nothing is at stake but opinions. They tend to ignore Ukraine. But the one where you could find out all about Ukraine today was CNBC, because it compelled attention, because the insiders, the finance oligarchs and predators, were dumping stocks, minus 200 in a very short period of time. The U.S. bond market, however, getting up because of the flight to safety, the flight to quality. So this is what it looks like. The Ukrainians are now boasting that their artillery has destroyed part of a column of Russian tanks. And this is the story they're telling, which I do not trust, is that overnight between Thursday and Friday, Thursday the 14th, Friday the 15th, the Ukrainian president, Poroshenko, once again, obviously with Cameron whispering in his ear, right, with all that accumulated perfidy of the British Foreign Office, right, the troublemakers and meddlers of Europe and the world. Poroshenko says that during the night, and this is, of course, reported by who? By the BBC. The BBC is the main source on this. A Russian armored column is alleged by Kiev to have entered Ukrainian territory overnight, and then the gallant, invincible supermen of Kiev fought back on Friday by shelling those Russian tanks. A major military escalation, if true. Now, the word from the Russian Foreign Ministry is there are no Russian tanks or armored personnel carriers on Ukrainian territory, and rather what's going on here is a Ukrainian attempt to sabotage the Russian relief column. We know the Ukrainian official position has been, there is no humanitarian crisis in the east of Ukraine. Everything is hunky-dory, even as the Soldateska of the Kiev fascist clique, these right sector neo-Nazi hoodlums, are bombarding cities, right? They're firing grads and rockets and so forth into Donetsk and Lugansk, responding to this real and existing humanitarian emergency. The Russian government put together a convoy of 280 trucks, a beautiful thing to see, white trucks containing water, food, medicine, tents, the usual humanitarian relief supplies. It is now 20, 30 Ks from the Ukrainian border, and it's going to be done with the negotiation with the Ukrainian fascist authorities under the auspices of the International Committee for the Red Cross. But the question is, once that convoy is into what is on the map Ukraine, will it get right into the so-called separatist areas, the areas controlled by the pro-Russian forces? This is clearly an attempt by the Ukrainians to use artillery bombardment to cut the roads that the 280 trucks would take to get to their actual destination. And we have to point out also that the Ukrainian answer to this situation are insignificant, inconsequential little convoys. There's one of 75 trucks. Well, 280 trucks is way better than 75 trucks, wouldn't you say? It's about 4 times better when the quantity is the main thing. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry says that they are receiving direct threats of military action from Kiev, saying, if you bring that convoy, or we're guessing now what the if is, the if you do something, Russia, then we, Ukrainian fascist regime, will respond by doing this, that, and the other thing. It is Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who points out that the alleged bombardment is an attempt to stop access by the humanitarian relief convoy to the areas where it is needed. NATO, under Foch of War Rasmussen, right, the little twerp who he got his start by backing Mad Dog Bush's Iraq war policy. And, of course, this Foch Rasmussen is very much in the tradition of Denmark, heavy Nazi collaboration during World War II, the model protectorate. So the model protectorate, again, he says the Russians are escalating while they talk cooperation. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's the 15th of August, Ferragosto, and best wishes to all our listeners there on the beaches of the Mediterranean in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and France and Bavaria. We're with you in spirit on Ferragosto. So it's the height of the European summer vacation exodus. This was, of course, a factor in the unleashing of World War II was that World War I, all the key people were on vacation, right? What did we say? That Churchill was at the beach with his kids. Lord Grey was fishing trout. Asquith was in the mountains, or whatever it was, and that's not good, right? Europeans get serious. And break with this insane U.S. policy, which is not even Obama's policy necessarily. It seems once again to be this other group, the warmonger group, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden. We have to assume that Kerry and Samantha Power, the war hoe, that they're involved, and then Cameron, right? So it's the collection. We're going to get to the Israelis in just a minute because they're undoubtedly a part of it. So the situation now is that the Ukrainians, they claim that they've been shooting up a bunch of Russian tanks. Never a good thing to do, but that's what they're claiming. Now they may be talking through their hat. The British Foreign Office is meddling openly. Not only is Cameron whispering in Poroshenko's ear, but the Foreign Office, the new Foreign Secretary, the latest nonentity in that post, the latest heir to the perfidy of Sir Edward Grey, has called in the Russian ambassador to demand explanations. And once again, remember, it's principally the BBC reporter who said, I saw Russian tanks or armored personnel carriers cross the border into Ukraine yesterday. While the humanitarian convoy was 40 Ks from the border, he claims that some tanks or armored vehicles went across. And he's got some pictures on social media, but of course those could be anything, right? They're just APCs on a road. This all comes despite the conciliatory remarks by Putin during the week, right? That he was not getting ready to break with the international system. Maybe he needs to consider breaking with the international system. Maybe now things have changed. So we've got Ferragosto of blood and gunfire on that Ukraine-Russian border. There will be a meeting of Lavrov with this the latest Ukrainian fascist nonentity foreign minister on Sunday. And the jitters on Wall Street were quite serious. They trotted at a guy from Wells Fargo saying, oh, we're sure it's going to be contained. It's got to be contained. If it's not, then your entire crazy market structure comes down. So obviously, we are in firm support of the Russian position. We're anti-fascist here. That makes us pro-Russian, and in particular this Kiev gang. We're told that the warmongers of Europe, the ones that are willing to go along with the Biden Ukrainian policy, are, first of all, the British, of course, Cameron, and the Foreign Office. Secondly, we have Poland and the hot-headed, reckless Foreign Minister Sikorsky, that is to say, Mr. Ann Applebaum, wife being a correspondent of the op-ed columnist of the Washington Post, and Lithuania, that wonderful bastion of democracy way out there, right? Of course, it's also a nest for Nazi sympathizers, right? It's where the big holidays of the year tend to be the commemorations of the SS divisions of Hitler. So the more America knows about that, the less they're going to be inclined to get into trouble for the sake of Lithuania. To Joe and Joe's mediocre, corrupt, nepotist son. Remember, a while ago we had clashes with Beau Biden, the Attorney General of Delaware. His idea of running a campaign was to put critics into the D.C. jail on fake Delaware warrants. This time we're dealing with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and that's the conveyor belt of aggressive imperialist policy to Comrade Poroshenko there in Kiev. So what were specific relevance? So what are we looking at right now? A very hot situation. The Anglo-American mad dog imperialists are very much on the march. We are told that the adventurer who claims to be the president of Ukraine, the chocolate baron, the chocolate soldier, Poroshenko, or as we prefer to call him, Pornoshenko. We call him Pornoshenko. This is in. And we're also passing, as we will discuss later in the show, we're passing through all these anniversaries of the First World War. But as we always, that binocular view of history, it's the one that's recommended by Confucius, it's the one that's recommended by Machiavelli, and that is one eye very much fixed on current events, the other eye fixed on history more or less ancient, according to because his policies are obscene. His threat to world peace is obscene. This imperialist stooge, Poroshenko, is apparently working together with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. That seems to be the imperialist combination operative right now. Obama, unfortunately, too lazy, too feckless to get his hands dirty in this stuff. So he leaves it. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and it is August 15th, 2014, the Feast of the Ascension, and it's also the famous Feria Augusta, the harvest festival established by the Emperor Augustus at this time of year, because, of course, at this point, the European wheat harvest